The prairie stretches to the horizon, gone gold and gone silent under the late afternoon sun. Wind pulls the dust into thin ribbons, and at the end of the trail, a borrowed mare stumbles for the second time. The rider doesn't dismount, just sits there, breathing hard, staring at a gate built from timber thick enough to hold back a river. Past the gate, fences run out in every direction until they dissolve into the pale grass of the foothills. Farther still, a house of stone and timber sits against the ridge, its windows catching the last copper light of the day, more fortress than home. In the yard, chickens scatter. A bony dog watches from beneath a water trough, doesn't bother to bark. And on the porch, behind curtains gone faded, one parlor door stays shut. A thin line of dust along the threshold. Months, maybe years. The girl gathers the reins. She is 19. She owns one dress, without a patch, a pair of boots that leak in rain, and a folded page tucked in her saddlebag. She nudges the mare forward.
The mare stumbled twice on the last stretch of road. Hollis Merrick pulled her up. Short sat there, breathing hard, staring at what lay ahead. She had expected big. Everybody in Cedar Falls talked about Broken Spur Ranch the way they talked about weather or death, like it was just a fact of the landscape, something too large to argue with, but talk hadn't prepared her. The gate alone was wider than her mother's entire house, built from timber so thick it could have held back a river. Beyond it, fences ran in every direction until they dissolved into the pale grass of the foothills. Somewhere past the barns and corrals and outbuildings, the main house sat against the ridge like a small fortress, its windows catching the last copper light of a spring afternoon. Hollis wiped her face with the tear rare as she could feel the inner teeth. The sweat dried stiff along her collar, the dull ache in her lower back from riding since before dawn. The mare shifted beneath her, borrowed technically from Mr. Hadley at the store in exchange for 3 weeks of sweeping his floors. Equally tired, equally unimpressed. "All right," Hollis said to the horse. "Don't embarrass me." The mare flicked one ear. Hollis nudged her forward. She was 19 years old. She owned one dress that wasn't patched, a pair of boots that leaked in rain, and a recipe for sourdough bread that her mother had written on the back of a seed catalog page 7 years ago. Her father had, since she was 12, thrown from a horse that spooked at a rattlesnake. A stupid death that had turned her already modest life into something closer to survival. Her mother, Ruth, had kept them fed through laundry work and mending and sheer forks of will. When the coughing started, at first, Ruth weaved it off. Just dust, she said. The way she said everything was just dust, just tired, just nothing. But the coughing didn't stop. It got worse, it got wet. And then one morning, Hollis found her mother on the kitchen floor, too weak to stand, blood on her lips. A look in her eyes that scared Hollis more than anything she had ever seen. Not fear exactly. Resignation. Like Ruth, had already started the slow business of letting go. The doctor in Ridgewater, Dr. Phelps, who smelled like ski and whose hands shook before noon, had examined Ruth and delivered his verdict with the bluntness of a man who had stopped caring about bedside manner sometime around the end of the war. She needs rest, real rest, medicine, better food than whatever you've been feeding her, and someone to look after her properly. Which means you need money, Miss Merrick, and I don't see how you're going to get it. He wasn't wrong. Hollis had already taken every job she could find in Ridgewater, washing dishes at the hotel, mucking stalls at the livery, helping Mrs. Calloway with her garden for 50 cents a week. It wasn't enough. It was never enough, and so she had done the one thing that nobody in their right mind would do. She had ridden 26 miles to ask Wyatt Kincaid for work. Everybody knew about Wyatt Kincaid. He was the richest man in the territory, maybe the richest man between St. Louis and San Francisco, depending on who was telling the story and how much they'd had to drink. He ran 12,000 head of cattle across land that stretched from Blackwater River to the edge of the Painted Hills. He employed 47 men, owned interests in 2 mining operations and a railroad spur, and had once, according to legend, bought an entire town's debt just to settle a grudge with the mayor. He was also, by every account Hollis had ever heard, a miserable son of a gun. Not mean exactly, Not cruel, just hard. The kind of hard that comes from building something enormous out of nothing, and then discovering that enormous still feels empty when you eat dinner alone. His wife Cordelia had died 8 years ago, pneumonia. The same winter that killed half the cattle in the valley. And since then, Wyatt had poured himself into the ranch the way a drowning man grabs at driftwood. He worked before dawn and past dark. He fired men for small mistakes. He spoke to his foreman in sentences that rarely exceeded 5 words, and he had not, as far as anyone could remember, smiled since approximately 1875. Hollis knew all of this. She rode through the gate anyway. The yard between the gate and the main house was almost comically large, a hard-packed expanse of dirt and gravel that could have held a cavalry parade. To her left, a long row of bunkhouses sat low against the ground, smoke drifting from their chimneys. To her right, a mass barch of double doors stood open, revealing the dark shapes of horses inside. Chickens scattered as she passed. A dog, some kind of hound, bony and serious, watched her from beneath a water trough. Didn't bother to bark. A man was leaning against the corral fence, rolling a cigarette date. Maybe 30. Sun darkened, mustache that needed trimming. Hat pushed so far back on his head it seemed to be defying the basic principles of hat wearing. He looked up. His eyebrows climbed. "Help you? I'm looking for Mr. Kincaid." His eyebrows went higher. "You are? I am. You got business with him? I'm looking for work." There was a pause. The man looked at her, really looked, taking in the borrowed horse, the patched dress, the dust, the youth of her, the obvious poverty. And then he started laughing, not unkindly exactly, but with a genuine amazement that made Hollis's ears burn. "Work," he repeated. "Here? That's what I said. Sweetheart, this is Broken Spur. We don't exactly. Don't call me sweetheart." He stopped laughing. Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, a flicker of interest. The way you'd look at a barn cat that suddenly swiped at your hand. "Fair enough," he said. "Name's Cole Farrow. I'm the head wrangler, and Mr. Kincaid doesn't hire women." "Has he told you that?" "He hadn't had to. No woman's ever asked." "Well," Hollis said, swinging down from the mare with as much dignity as someone with saddle's sore legs could manage. "Now one has." Cole studied her for another moment, then shook his head slowly. "The way people do when they've decided something is going to be entertaining, regardless of how it turns out. Main house, front door, knock loud. He's probably in his study and he keeps the door shut. Don't take it personal when he says no." "Thank you. You're welcome, and miss." She turned back. "Good luck. You're going to need about 10 years' worth." The main house was something out of a fever dream. Hollis had seen drawings of fancy houses in catalog, big places back east with columns and parlors and rooms that served no purpose except to prove the owner had money. But this was different. This was a frontier mansion, built from stone and timber, solid as a fort, but with touches that spoke of someone who had once tried to make it beautiful. There were curtains in the windows, though they were faded. A porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The boards were cracked. Flower boxes that were empty. A door knocker shaped like a bull's head that was green with tarnish. She knocked. Loud, like Cole said. Nothing. She knocked again. The door opened so fast she almost fell forward. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as his house. Wyatt Kincaid was 52 years old, though the years sat heavy on him. Tall, broad-shouldered, face all jaw and cheekbone, deeply lined around the eyes and mouth. His hair was iron gray, cut short, and his eyes were the color of creek water in winter. Cold. Not even slightly interested in whatever she was about to say. "What, Tet?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was more like a door being shut in word form. "Mr. Kincaid, my name is Hollis Merrick. I've come from Ridgewater to ask about work." "No, I can cook, clean, mend, tend horses, keep accounts." "I said no." "And I'll work harder than any man you've got on this ranch." Wyatt looked at her the way he might a fence post that had suddenly started talking. There was no anger in it, no contempt, just a flat absolute disinterest that was somehow worse than either. "Miss Merrick," he said, "I have 47 men on this ranch. I have a cook, 2 stock managers, a head wrangler, and a foreman who's been with me since before you were born. I don't need help. I especially don't need help from a girl who looks like she rode here on a prayer and a borrowed horse." The horsel is borrowed, Hollis admitted. The rest of me is mine. Something happened in Wyatt's face then, a twitch barely visible, at the corner of his mouth. Could have been irritation, could have been something else. He looked past her, at the yard, at the fading light, at the 26 miles of empty trail she would have to ride back in the dark. You rode from Ridgewater? Yes, sir. Today? Left before dawn. And you plan to ride back tonight? If you say no, I suppose I'll have to. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the door. You can sleep in the house tonight, spare room at the end of the hall. Tomorrow morning you ride home. Mr. Kincaid. That's the offer, Miss Merrick. Take it, or take the road. She took it. The spare room was larger than her entire house. It had a bed with a real mattress, not a straw tick, an actual mattress. Most peasants were tough, or its hospital's basin and a window that looked out over the valley. Hollis stood in the middle of it for a full minute, afraid to touch anything. Before she sat down on the edge of the bed and felt the mattress give beneath her and almost cry. She didn't cry. She had made a decision somewhere around age 14 that crying was a luxury she couldn't afford, and she had mostly stuck to it, with occasional exceptions involving stubbed toes and the anniversary of her father's death. Instead, she washed her face and spare shirt on the back of the door, went to find the kitchen. The kitchen was a disaster. Not dirty exactly, more neglected, like a room that had been used every day without ever being cared about. The stove was caked with old grease. The pots hanging from the ceiling rack were tarnished black. The pantry was stocked with enough food to feed a regiment, but most of it was stored carelessly. Flour open to the air, sugar half spilled, dried beans scattered across the shelf like someone had given up halfway through putting them away. Layer of grime on the windowsill. Their meals were apparently prepared, had a gouge in its surface, deep enough to hide a coin. The ranch cook, she learned later, was a man named Mose Kettering, who had been feeding the Crooked Broken Spur crew for 6 years and whose primary qualification seemed to be that he was willing to do it. His meals were functional, heavy on salt pork and beans, light on anything that required actual skill or affection, and he resented any suggestion that they could be improved the way a dog resents being told it can't sleep on the furniture. But Mose wasn't in the kitchen that evening. Nobody was. The crew had already eaten. She could see the evidence. A stack of tin plates in the sink, a pot of something gray and cooling on the stove, and the house was quiet, in a way that felt less like peace and more like holding your breath. Hollis rolled up her sleeves. She started with the stove. It took her the better part of an hour, working with lye soap and a scrub brush she found under the sink, but by the time she was done, the iron gleamed and the kitchen smelled like clean metal instead of old grease. She organized the pantry next, sealing the flour into proper containers, sweeping the shelves, arranging the provisions in a way that made sense. She scrubbed the table, the windowsill, the floor, or on the stove. She washed every dish in the sink and stacked them properly. Then, because she was there and the kitchen was clean, and her mother's voice was in her head saying, "You never enter someone's house without leaving it better than you found it." She made bread. She used Ruth's recipe, the one on the back of the seed catalog page. It was simple: flour, water, salt, a bit of sugar. The sourdough starter she'd been carrying in a small jar in her saddlebag because she never went anywhere without it. She mixed the dough by hand, kneaded it on the clean table, shaped it into 2 round loaves, set them near the stove to rise while she finished cleaning. By the time the bread went into the oven, it was past 10. The house was silent, except for the tick of a clock somewhere in the hallway and the occasional cruel settling. Hollis sat in a kitchen-near chair. She waited, and without meaning to, she fell asleep. She woke to the smell of bread and the sound of footsteps. Wyatt Kincaid was standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing a rumpled shirt and suspends and an expression she couldn't read, staring at the stove, then at the pantry, then at the table, then at the bread which was cooling on a cloth on the counter. Golden brown, cracked across the top the way sourdough bakes right. "What is this?" he said. Hollis stood up, smoothing her dress, trying to look like she hadn't just been asleep in someone else's kitchen at 5 in the morning. "I made bread." "I can see that." "Why?" "Because the kitchen needed cleaning. and it seemed a waste not to use it once it was clean. Wyatt walked to the counter. He stood over the bread for a moment, then tore off a piece. Chewed it slowly. His face didn't change, not one muscle moved. But he tore off another piece and ate that too. Who taught you to bake? She any good? She's the best cook in Cedar Falls County. Was, before she got sick. Wyatt set the bread down. He looked for the first time. She saw something behind the coldness in his eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but a crack in the wall. A place where light might eventually get through. "One day?" he said. "Sir, you get one day today. If you can prove you're worth something to this ranch, you stay. If you can't, you ride home tonight. That's the deal." Hollis straightened her shoulders. "What do you want me to do?" "Whatever needs doing. I'm not going to hold your hand, Miss Merrick. Figure it out." He took the rest of the bread, walked out. The first things Hollis figured out was that Broken and Spur Ranch was, beneath its impressive exterior, slowly falling apart. Not structurally, not obviously, but in all the small ways that happen when a household has no one paying attention to the details. The porch boards she'd noticed the night before were worse than she thought. 2 of them were soft with rot. The flower boxes weren't just empty. Their brackets were rusted, one hanging at an angle that suggested it was one good storm away from taking someone's head off. Inside the house, curtains were moth-eaten. Furniture was dusty, and an entire parlor, a beautiful room with a stone fireplace and wide windows, had been closed off with its door shut. A thin line of dust along the threshold, suggesting no one had entered it. In months, maybe years, she started with what she knew. Went to the barn, found tools. Spent the first 2 hours of daylight prying up the rotted porch boards and replacing them with planks she cut from lumber stacked behind the barn. The work was hard, harder than she'd expected. She hit her thumb with the hammer twice and split her lip when a board kicked back at her. But by mid-morning, the porch was solid, level, no longer trying to kill anyone. The flower boxes came next. She climbed a ladder to detach the brackets, brought them down, cleaned off the rust with sand and vinegar from the kitchen, reattached them straight. She didn't have flowers, but she found some wild sage and yellow prairie grass growing along the corral fence and planted clumps of it in each box. It wasn't elegant, but it was alive. By then, the ranch hands were starting to notice. A few of them drifted past on their way to morning tasks, checking horses, moving cattle to new pasture, hauling water. Each one slowed enough to see the young woman on the ladder with grease on her hands and sage in her hair. Most of them said nothing. A couple exchanged looks. One older man with a beard like a bird's nest stopped his horse and watched her for a solid minute before saying quietly, "Huh," and riding on. Cole Farrell found her around 11. She was in the kitchen again, up to her elbows in dough. "So, you're still here," he said from the doorway. "He gave me a day. I heard. I also heard you cleaned the kitchen last night." Mose isn't happy about it. Mose's kitchen was a health hazard, Cole grinned. "You might not want to say that to Mose. Is Mose the kind of man who gets offended easily? Mose is the kind of man who once threw a skillet at a horse because it looked at him wrong. So yeah, I'd say he's got a short fuse." Hollis considered this. "I'll make him a pie." "A pie?" People who throw skillets at horses are usually people who haven't had a good pie in a long time. Cole laughed, a real laugh, sudden and surprised. He shook his head. "Miss Merrick, you are either the smartest person I've ever met or the craziest. Haven't figured out which yet. Could be both, could be." He leaned against the doorframe. "Listen, I don't know what you think one day is going to prove Mr. Kincaid. He's not a bad man, but he's been running this place like a machine for 8 years. Everything by the numbers. No room for anything that doesn't fit the ledger. And you," he gestured at her, encompassing the flower on her face, the patched dress, the sheer improbability of her presence. "You do not fit the ledger. Maybe the ledger needs updating. Maybe. But that's not your call to make." He was right, and she knew it. But knowing something and are different things entirely. And Hollis Merrick had never been much good at accepting the way things were when she could see how they ought to be. She cooked lunch, not just any lunch. She cooked the kind of lunch that makes men stop talking mid-sentence and look down at their plate with an expression usually reserved for discovering gold in a creek bed. She used what was in the pantry. There was plenty. just badly utilized. She made a proper stew with beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, and a gravy so rich you could have floated a horseshoe in it. She baked cornbread to go with it. Using the last of the buttermilk she found in the cold cellar, she made the pie she had promised, apple, from a barrel of dried apples in the pantry, with the crust that shattered when you pressed a fork into it and a filling that was sweet and tart and spiced with cinnamon. She found buried behind a sack of rice. The ranch hands ate in the bunkhouse, served from a table that could seat 30. When Hollis carried the food over, she had to make 4 trips. Her arms were shaking by the last one. The men looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion that she was starting to recognize as the default expression of anyone encountering her on this ranch. Then they tasted the stew. The room went quiet, not the quiet of disinterest, but the quiet of 30 men simultaneously realizing that they had been eating Mose Kettering's cooking for 6 years and had apparently forgotten what real food tasted like. Spoons scraped bowls. Cornbread disappeared. The pie lasted approximately 4 minutes. A young hand named Wesley Vance, who couldn't have been more than 16, looked up from his empty plate with an expression of profound wonderment. "Ma'am, where'd you learn to cook like that?" "My mother." "Your mother single?" The table erupted in laughter. Even Hollis couldn't help smiling. "My mother is ill, which is why I'm here." The laugh faded in Wesley. I looked embarrassed. "Sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean. It's all right." She'd have liked the compliment. An older hand, the bearded man who'd watched her on the ladder that morning, spoke up from the far end of the table. "What's your name, miss?" "Hollis Merrick. You planning to stay?" "That depends on Mr. Kincaid." "Well," the bearded man said, picking up his second piece of cornbread, "if he's got any sense at all, he'll chain you to that kitchen stove." That's not exactly the arrangement I was hoping for. More laughter. She could feel something shifting in the room, not acceptance. Not yet, but a softening of the edges. These were men who worked hard and ate badly and didn't expect much from life beyond a paycheck and a bunk and the occasional Saturday night in town. The idea that someone might care about what they put in their mouths was genuinely novel to most of them. Mose Kettering did not attend lunch. She found out later that he'd been in the barn sulking, which was apparently his preferred response to any disruption of his routine. She saved him a plate anyway, left it on the kitchen counter with a note that said, "The stove cleans up easier now. Hope you don't mind." She didn't know if he'd read it. She didn't know if it mattered. What mattered was the afternoon. She spent it in the house, working through the rooms one by one. Not overhauling them. She didn't have the time or the right. But tending them. She beat dust from curtains. Polished furniture with beeswax she'd found in the pantry room, washed windows until the late afternoon light came through clear and gold instead of gray. She didn't touch the closed parlor. Something about that shut door felt deliberate, and she had enough sense to know that some rooms stay closed for a reason. But she noticed things. She noticed that the hallway had framed photographs on the wall, but several of them were hung crooked, and the glass on one was cracked. She noticed that the dining room table, a massive thing built from a single slab of oak, was set for a single set of silverware at the head, and the rest of the table was bare. She noticed that Wyatt's study, whose door was slightly ajar, had books stacked on every surface and an oil lamp that was smoking because the wick needed trimming. She trimmed the wick. She straightened the photographs. She didn't touch the place setting. At 5, she went to the stables. The horses were magnificent. Wyatt Kincaid didn't skimp on his livestock, whatever he skimped on elsewhere, but several of them were restless, pacing their stalls with the nervous energy of animals that hadn't properly worked. She talked to them the way she talked to all animals, which was the way most people talk to children, softly, directly, without condescension. She checked their water, their feed, their hooves. One mare, a beautiful Roman Bloites, had a stone bruise that nobody had noticed. Hollis cleaned it, packed it with a poultice of mud and dock leaves, wrapped it carefully. Holt found her there, kneeling in the straw, the mare's hoof in her lap. You found Auntie's bruise," he said. "How long has she had it?" "I don't know. She's been favoring that leg for a few days, but I thought she just stepped wrong. It's a stone bruise." Not bad, but if you leave it, she'll go lame. Cole crouched beside her, looked at the poultice. Where did you learn to do that? My father was a horseman before he died. She lowered the hoof gently and stood up, brushing straw from her knees. He wasn't a great horseman. He wasn't great at much, but he knew hooves. Something in her voice made Cole look at her differently. Not with pity, which she would have hated, but with the recognition of someone who understood that most people on the frontier carried their losses the way they carried their tools. Always within reach, always a little heavy. Your mother, he said. She bad? Bad enough. And you rode 26 miles to ask a man who fires people for breathing wrong if you could work in his kitchen. It seemed like a good idea at the time. You know what? It might have been. He stood up, dusted off his hands. Dinner's at 6. You cooking? If there's food to cook, pantry's full. Mose just doesn't know what to do with any of it. Mose and I are going to have a conversation. I'd pay money to see that. Dinner was roasted chicken, 3 of them, from the coop behind the barn with mashed potatoes. Green beans from a jar, old cellar, fresh bread and gravy. She made 2 more pies because the first one had disappeared so fast. She suspected some of the men hadn't gotten any. She set the bunkhouse table properly, with plates facing up, instead of stacked in the middle. And she put out salt and pepper in a dish of butter, which apparently qualified as a revolutionary act, because full of the hands stared at the butter as if they'd never seen it before. She carried a plate to the main house for Wyatt. He was in his study, behind a desk covered in papers, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He looked up when she knocked. "Dinner," she said, setting the plate on the one clear corner of his desk. He looked at the plate, then at her. "You've been busy. You told me to figure it out. I told you to prove you're worth something. I didn't tell you to reorganize my entire household. I didn't reorganize it. I just cleaned a few things. Your house is..." She stopped herself. "My house is what, Miss Merrick?" She met his eyes. "Your house is beautiful, Mr. Kincaid. It deserves better than dust." He held her gaze for a moment that stretched long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then he picked up his fork, cut into the chicken, chewed, swallowed, cut another piece. "Sit down," he said. "Excuse me, there's a chair. Sit in it." She sat, confused, slightly alarmed, in a leather chair across from his desk. Wyatt ate in silence for 2 full minutes, working through the chicken and potatoes with the focused efficiency of a man who had been eating alone for a very long time. Finally, he set down a fork in his fork. "Your mother's sick." "Sick?" "Yes, sir." "How sick?" "The doctor says she needs rest, and medicine, and better food. She needs someone to look after her, and that someone is you. There isn't anyone else." "What about the doctor?" "Dr. Phelps drinks more than he prescribes. He means well, but meaning well doesn't keep someone alive." Wyatt leaned back in his chair. He looked tired. Not just evening tired, but bone tired. The kind of fatigue that accumulates over years and settles into the lines of your face sediment at the bottom of a river. "You fixed my porch," he said. "I replaced 3 boards. You found a stone bruise on a horse my wrangler missed. Cole would have found it. Maybe. You also cleaned my kitchen. Reorganized my pantry. Fed my crew a meal that apparently bordered on a religious experience." He stopped. "A transformative experience. And you trimmed the lamp in my study. It was smoking." "I know it was smoking. It's been smoking for a month. I keep meaning to fix it." He paused. "I keep meaning to fix a lot of things." There was something in his voice then. Not vulnerability exactly, because men like Wyatt Kincaid didn't do vulnerability, but an honesty that surprised both of them. He looked at his empty plate, then at Hollis, and for a moment he seemed genuinely uncertain, which was probably a feeling he hadn't experienced since the Grant administration. 1 month, he said. Hollis's heart jumped. "Sir? 1 month room and board plus wages. $3 a week. You handle the house. Cooking, cleaning, whatever else you see that needs doing. At the end of the month, we'll talk. I need to send money home to my mother. I'll advance you 2 weeks' pay tonight. You can send it with the mail rider tomorrow." She wanted to say something gracious, something composed. The kind of thing a woman in a novel would say. Something about gratitude and opportunity and the nobility of honest work instead. What came out was, "Thank you, I won't let you down." "People always say that," Wyatt said, picking up his whiskey. "Then they let you down." "I'm not people. He almost smiled. She was sure of it this time. A fractional movement at the corner of his mouth. There and gone, like a fish breaking the surface of still water. "No," he said quietly. "I don't suppose you are." She stood to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Miss Merrick? Sir? The bread you made last night." "Yes, make it again." She walked back to the spare room. Her room, at least for now, sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the wall for a long time. Outside, the sun was setting behind the ridge, throwing long shadows across the valley, and she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling into evening. Horses being stabled, the low murmur of men around a fire, a dog barking somewhere far off. She thought about her mother, alone in their house in Ridgewater, coughing into a rag, trying to heat water on a stove that barely worked. She thought about the money she would send tomorrow. $6, more than she'd earned in a month of odd jobs back home. She thought about the month ahead, about proving herself to a man who expected to be disappointed, about cooking and cleaning and fixing things in a house that was grander than anything she'd ever imagined and sadder than anything she'd ever seen. She thought about the closed parlor door and the dining table set for one, and the way Wyatt Kincaid ate his dinner in silence in a room full of papers, books, and an oil lamp that nobody had cared enough to fix. She pulled her mother's recipe from her saddlebag, the seed catalog page soft with handling. Ruth's handwriting, faded but still legible in the last of the light. She held it against her chest for a moment. Then she got up, went back to the kitchen, started the sourdough. She fed the starter. She mixed the dough. She kneaded it on the clean table. Her table now, at least for a month, felt the dough changing under her hands, going from shaggy and resistant to smooth and alive, the way good dough does when it decides to cooperate. While the bar rose, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to her mother. She didn't mention the size of the ranch, or the richness of Wyatt Kincaid, or the fact that she was sleeping on a real mattress for the first time in her life. She wrote about the horses and the prairie grass, and the flower boxes and the flower boxes, the bread she was making, and the crew of men who had eaten her cooking like it was the first good thing that had happened to them all year. She wrote, "I'm all right, Mama. I think I might be more than all right. Don't you dare get worse before I can get home." She folded the letter, sealed it with a dab of flour paste, set it aside for the mail rider. Then she shaped the bread, set it to proof, waited. The house creaked around her. Somewhere down the hall, she heard Wyatt's study door close. With footsteps, as in slow-mo, the tread of a man going to a bed that was too big in a room that was too quiet. She heard the creak of the floorboards overhead. Then silence. The bread went into the oven. She watched through the oven door as it rose and browned, the crisp in the way her mother's bread always split. A long, ragged tear across the top, like the earth cracking open after rain. When it was done, she took it out, set it on the counter, covered it with a clean cloth, left a note beside it for her morning. Then she went to bed. She fell asleep, listening to the sounds of Broken Spur Ranch, a world away from everything she knew, impossibly vast, impossibly wealthy, and somehow beneath all that stone and timber and reputation, impossibly in need of something it didn't know how to ask for. Hollis didn't know yet what that something was. She only knew that she recognized the shape of it, the way you recognize the outline of your own house when you're still a mile away. Familiar even from a distance, even in the dark. The first week passed in a blur of flour dust and aching shoulders. Hollis cooked breakfast at 5. Before the sky had fully committed to being light, she made eggs, scrambled, fried and poached, whatever the morning called for, and bacon or salt pork, and biscuits from scratch every single day because she had learned from her mother that a good biscuit could make a man forgive almost anything, including being woken up at dawn to chase cattle across 10 miles of open range. She brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and she set out butter and preserves she'd found in the back of the cold cellar, jarred and labeled in a woman's handwriting that she suspected belonged to Cordelia Kincaid, and that she was careful never to ask about. The ranch hands ate like wolves. They came in dusty and half awake. They sat down and didn't speak until the food was gone, and then they spoke too much all at once, falling over each other to tell her what they liked and what they wanted tomorrow, and whether she could make that pie again. The apple one. The one with the crust that broke apart like it was made of something better than flour and butter. It is made of flour and butter, Hollis told Wesley Vance, who had asked for the third time. That's all a crust is. Then how come Mose's crust tastes like saddle leather? Because Mose overworks his dough. You have to handle it gently, like something alive. Wesley considered this with the gravity of a philosopher encountering a new theorem. I don't think Mose handles anything gently. No, Hull agreed. I don't think he does. Mose Kettering remained a problem, not an active problem. He hadn't thrown any skillets, but a simmering one. He had returned to the kitchen the morning after Hollis's arrival, found it transformed, and responded by standing in the middle of the room with his arms folded and his jaw set, and a look on his face that suggested he was calculating exactly how much dynamite it would take to return everything to its previous state. You moved my things, he said. I organized your things. There's a difference. I knew where everything was. Did you know the flour was open? Moths were getting in. I don't have moths. You did. I cleaned them out. They reached an uneasy truce over the following days. Hollis handled breakfast and dinner. Mose kept the midday meal, mostly because the hands expected it, and partly because Hollis recognized that stripping a man of his entire purpose, however poorly he fulfilled it, was a cruelty she wasn't willing to commit. She showed him, carefully, without condescension, how to season a cast iron skillet properly, how to keep beans from going to mush, how to make gravy without lumps. He accepted these lessons the way a cat accepts being bathed, with rigid tolerance and an air of profound indignity. But she noticed that his lunches started improving, not dramatically, but the beans held their shape and the gravy smoothed out, and one afternoon he made a cornbread that was ugly, genuinely, not terrible. She left a note on the counter. Good cornbread today. He didn't respond. But the next morning she found a jar of wild honey on the kitchen table that hadn't been there before, and she understood that this was Mose Kettering's version of a peace offering, and she accepted it without comment. Wyatt, meanwhile, was a study in contradictions. He had given Hollis the job with the air of a man placing a bet he expected to lose, and for the first several days, he treated her presence in his house the way one might treat an unfamiliar piece of furniture, acknowledging it existed without quite knowing what to do about it. He ate the meals she brought to his study without comment. He passed her in the hallway without speaking. He noticed the changes she made, the clean windows, the polished furniture, the trimmed lamp wicks. The way you notice the weather and changing, as a fact rather than an event, but he was watching. Hollis could feel it. The first real conversation happened on the fourth day, when she knocked on his study door to deliver dinner and found him sitting not at his desk, but in the leather chair by the window, staring out at the valley with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not cold, not hard, just tired. Your dinner, Mr. Kincaid. He turned his head slowly. What is it tonight?
Beef stew, bread.
Last of the dried apples with brown sugar. You like dried apples. I like what I can find in the pantry. If you want fresh, someone will have to go to town. I'll send Cole on Saturday. He paused. Sit down, Miss Merrick. She hesitated. She sat. Wyatt picked up the plate and ate slowly. Tonight he chewed each bite as though he were thinking about it, tasting it, allowing himself the small luxury enjoying oinks.
How long has your mother been sick, he asked.
6 weeks, maybe 7. And before that? Before that, she was fine. Tired but fine. She worked hard her whole life, Mr. Kincaid. Harder than anyone I know. What kind of work? Laundry. Mending. Whatever people would pay her for. After my father died, she kept us fed by sheer stubbornness. I don't think she ever rested a full day in her life. Wyatt set down his fork. That's probably what made her sick. The bluntness of it stung, mostly because it was true. Probably, she said. You feel responsible. Don't you think I should? I think responsibility and guilt are different things, and most people can't tell them apart. He looked at her. You're here. You're sending money home. That's responsibility. Blaming yourself for your mother's body wearing out, that's guilt. And guilt doesn't cook meals or fix porches. It was the most he'd said to her at one time, and it landed with a weight that surprised her. She looked at him, really looked, past the iron jaw, and the pale eyes and the reputation, and saw something she hadn't expected, not softness. Something more complicated than softness. A man who had spent years building walls and was starting to stood us, dimly, that the walls had kept out things he needed along with things he didn't. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For saying that," he grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. Went back to his stew. The second week brought something Hollis had not anticipated. She was cleaning the front parlor, not the closed one, the other one, the room off the entryway that Wyatt used to greet visitors. When a knock came at the front door, she opened it. The man to the porch was tall, well-dressed, wearing a black coat that had been brushed clean but was old enough to be showing its age at the elbows. His hat was in his hand, his hair was gray at the temples. His eyes were pale blue and moved over her face with the polite attention of a man who was very good at appearing polite. "I'm here to see Mr. Kincaid," he said. "Is he in?" "Who should I say is calling?" "Jonas Pike, from the Cedar Falls Bank." Something in the name made Hollis pause, not because she recognized it exactly, but because of the way he said it. "Cedar Falls Bank, the way you say something you own." "One moment, please." She left him on the porch, closed the door behind her, walked down the hall to Wyatt's study, knocked once. "There's a Mr. Pike here to see you," from the bank. The silence that followed was longer than it should have been. When she opened the study door, Wyatt was standing behind his desk. His shoulders had gone rigid. The color had left his face in a way she'd never seen before. Not pale exactly, but set like a man bracing himself before stepping into a cold river. "Show him in," Wyatt said, "then leave us." She showed Jonas Pike into the study. She closed the door behind him, but she didn't leave right away. She stood in the hallway. She should have gone back to her cleaning. She should have minded her own business. But something about the way Wyatt had looked, something about the way his shoulders had gone rigid, kept her rooted to the spot outside his study door. She could hear their voices through the wood, not clearly, but enough. 60 days, Wyatt. That's the arrangement I'm offering. Consider it. I call this business. You've been 6 months behind on the interest, 2 years behind on principal. I've been carrying you longer than any bank in the territory would carry a man. You know why you've been carrying me. A pause. I know what you think you know. But sentiment isn't a currency, Wyatt. 60 days or the bank takes the ranch. Hollis stepped back from the door. She walked quietly down the hall, went back to her cleaning. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the room around her, the polished furniture, the clean windows, the house that had begun in the space of 1 week to feel almost like a home. Broken Spur Ranch was not what it looked like. The richest man in the territory. The stone and timber mansion, the 47 men and the 12,000 head of cattle, all of it, every last piece of it was standing on the edge of a cliff. And a man in a black coat had just come to push it off. Hollis put down her rag. She walked to the window. She looked out at the yard where Cole was breaking a young horse, and Wesley was hauling water, and the bearded man was leaning against the fence, chewing on a piece of straw. She looked at the flower boxes she had planted with wild sage, at the porch she had repaired, at the whole enormous, aching, secretly collapsing thing somewhere. Behind her in the study, a man she barely knew was fighting for a life he had spent 30 years building. And somewhere ahead of her, on a trail she couldn't yet see, was a choice she didn't know she was about to make. But the outline of it was already forming. The way the outline of a house forms when you're still a mile away. Familiar. Even in the dark, she heard the study door open. She heard footsteps in the hall. She heard the front door close. And through the window she watched Jonas Pike walk to his horse, tip his hat once to the empty yard, and ride out through the gate she had ridden through a week ago on a borrowed mare with nothing but a recipe. Hollis picked up her rag. She went back to cleaning, because that was the only thing she knew how to do. Move her hands, do the work, trust that the bread would rise if she did it right. But something had changed, something she couldn't name yet, the way the sky changes before a storm. Not the storm itself, just the promise of one. And somewhere upstairs, in a study full of papers and books and an oil lamp that no longer smoked, Wyatt Kincaid sat at his desk with his head in his hands. A man who had built an empire out of nothing, and was about to lose it to a man who had loved his wife long before he did. Hollis didn't know that part yet, but she would. Soon. Hollis did not sleep that night. She lay in the spare room. Real mattress underneath her, real quilt over her, real window showing real stars, and none of it felt real. That was all he had. 2 months was the distance between a man keeping his ranch and a man losing it, between 47 cowboys having work, and 47 cowboys drifting to whatever the next drought town would give them. Between Wyatt Kincaid being Wyatt Kincaid, and Wyatt Kincaid being nobody. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about the way his shoulders had gone rigid, the color that had left his face, the way he had said, "You know why you've been carrying me," which meant something. Which meant there was history in that room she had not been part of. History older than her being born, maybe. Because Jonas Pike was 50-something, and Wyatt was 52, and Cordelia Kincaid had died 8 years ago in a winter that killed half the cattle in the valley. Hollis turned on her side. She was piecing something together, and she did not like the shape it was making. She got out of bed at 4 because there was no point pretending to sleep, because her hands wanted something to do, and because the kitchen, her kitchen, at least for the moment, was the only place in the house where the world made any sense. She lit the stove. She set the fufai. She pulled down the flour and she started its biscuits. Her hands moved without her mind, which was the only useful thing about hands. They knew work even when the head was somewhere else. Cut the butter into the flour. Cold hands, quick fingers, add the buttermilk. Fold, don't overwork. Cut, bake. By 5:30, the crew was eating. By 6, they were gone. By 6:30, Hollis was standing at the sink washing dishes and thinking about Cole. Cole knew. She was sure of it now. Cole knew whatever Wyatt was not saying. Cole had been at Broken Spur longer than she'd been alive. He was the head wrangler. He was the closest thing Wyatt had to a friend. He'd know. She waited until mid-morning. She waited until the yard was quiet and the men were spread across 10,000 acres, and Wyatt was locked in his study with his papers and his silence. Then she walked out to the stables. Cole was mucking a stall. He looked up when she came in. He read her face. He put down the pitchfork. "You heard something." "I heard something." "How much?" "Enough." He wiped his hands on his pants. He came out of the stall. He looked past her, at the yard, at the mountains, anywhere but at her. "Miss Merrick, that's not my story to tell." "I know it isn't." "Then why are you here?" "Because I'm the one cooking his breakfast, and he's the one who's going to lose everything in 2 months. And I don't understand what's happening in this house, and nobody in this house is going to tell me." Cole looked at her, really looked the way he had looked at her the first day. When she got off the borrowed mare and told him not to call her sweetheart, he shook his head, slow. He was in love with her, Miss Merrick. Hollis went still. Who? Jonas Pike. He was in love with Cordelia Kincaid since they were both about 12 years old. The stables smelled of hay and horse and old leather. The morning light came through the doorway in a long slant, and Hollis felt something rearrange itself inside her chest. Since they were 12, grew up on adjoining farms, Kansas, little town called Wolf Creek. Jonas was the spank's son. Cordelia was the schoolteacher's daughter. Everyone thought they'd marry. Everyone. Their parents. The town. Cordelia. Then Wyatt Kincaid rode into Wolf Creek. Summer 87, 26 years old. Broke. Nothing to his name but a horse and a plant. And Deal looked at him, and that was that. Jonas never forgave her. Never forgave Wyatt. Never forgave any of it. Followed them out here 5 years later. Started his own bank. And Wyatt. Because Wyatt was a young rancher trying to build. Borrowed from him. Just once. In 1863. And Jonas has been holding it over him ever since. Not exactly. Not at first. Because at first Wyatt paid on time. Paid ahead of time. Because Wyatt was building fast. And for years it looked like Wyatt was going to be too big to touch. What changed? Cole's jaw worked. The winter Cordelia died. Hollis waited. That winter the herds went down. Half the valley and Wyatt. Cordelia was sick already. Pneumonia, bad. And Wyatt needed cash to bring a specialist doctor up from Denver. Real doctor, real medicine. Because Dr. Phelps in Ridgewater, who was young then and already drinking, wasn't going to save her. So Wyatt went to Jonas. Wyatt went to Jonas, and And Jonas said the bank couldn't extend more credit, not until Wyatt cleared what he already owed, which Wyatt didn't have, because the cattle were dying and the whole valley was on fire financially, and there was no cash anywhere. Hollis felt her hands go cold. He let her die. He didn't let her die exactly. He just didn't help her live. That's the same thing. That's the same thing. Cole looked at her. Wyatt knows this. Yes, Wyatt knows this. And he kept doing business with him for 8 years. Wyatt didn't have a choice. Jonas holds the paper on this ranch, and Jonas has been playing a long game, and Wyatt buries himself in work. Because if he sits still for 1 minute, he'll have to think about what happened. And thinking about what happened will kill him. So he doesn't think. He just works. And he pays what he can, and he pretends the man who let his wife die is just a banker doing bank business. Hollis put her hand against the stall door. She needed something solid. Because the room was moving, because the whole house was moving, because everything she had done since she got here, every biscuit, every scrubbed floor, every trimmed lamp wick, had happened inside a story she did not know she was standing in. How much does he owe? I don't know exactly, but it's more than the ranch can pay in the time he's got. I know that much. Can he sell cattle? He can sell cattle at the wrong time of year for the wrong price, and even then it won't be enough. So Jonas wins. Cole looked at her. Jonas wins. Hollis walked back to the house, slow. She walked the way you walk when your legs are still moving, but your mind has already stopped somewhere behind you. The yard was quiet. The wind moved across the grass. A red-tailed hawk went over the barn. I silenced for a long moment because looking up was easier than looking at the house. She had going to lose everything to the man who killed his wife. Saw it. She thought. Nobody knows this. And nobody, just Cole, just Wyatt, just now me. And under all of that, deeper, where she was afraid to look, was another thought. He didn't have to tell me any of this. He didn't have to let me in. He didn't have to say, sit down, eat something, the plate is for you. But he did, which meant she stopped walking. She was in the middle of the yard. The hawk was gone. She was staring at the porch she had rebuilt, which meant she was in this now, whether he wanted her to be or not. She did not tell him what she knew, because there was no way to tell him without admitting she had listened at the door. And there was no way to admit she had listened at the door without whatever fragile thing he lost it. So she did not tell him. She did what she knew. She cooked, she cleaned, she fixed. She kept the household running, but she started doing something else too. She started keeping accounts, not the ranch. Accounts. Wyatt had a ledger for those, locked in a drawer she was never going to touch. Her own accounts. Every Saturday, when Wyatt handed her the envelope with her wages, she took out enough to send to her mother, and the rest she did not spend. She did not put it in a bank, because the nearest bank was Cedar Falls Bank, and Cedar Falls Bank was Jonas Pike. She put it in the tin under her bed, next to the letter from Ruth, next to the seed catalog page. Then she started baking bread for Cedar Falls. The idea came to her on the 12th day. Cole was going into Cedar Falls to pick up freight, nails, coffee, a new coil of barbed wire. Hollis met him at the wagon. She had 4 loaves wrapped in cloth. Take these to the hotel. Cole looked at the loaves, then at her. What am I saying when I hand these over? You're saying Miss Merrick from Broken Spur is baking, and she'll deliver 2 loaves a day if the hotel wants them. 25 cents each. Cole raised an eyebrow. 25 cents is steep for bread. 25 cents is fair for this bread. Cole almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. He came back that evening. He handed her $1 and a note from the hotel manager. Please send 4 loaves tomorrow, also 2 pies if she can. Hollis stood in the yard with $1 in her hand, which was the first $1 she had ever earned outside a house that wasn't hers, which was not much, which was everything. Because it meant she could work, not just as a housekeeper, not just as some city seats kitchen girl. She could work. She could earn, she could put things in a tin, she could build, and if she could build then, maybe. She stopped that thought. She was not ready for that thought. By the 3rd week, she had standing orders from the hotel and the general store and Casper Gibbs at the saloon, who had never in his life been accused of sentiment. But who told Cole that Hollis Merrick's apple pie was the best thing that had happened to Cedar Falls since the railroad, and he'd take 4 a week if she'd send them? Wyatt did not know. At least, she thought he did not know. He noticed she was in the kitchen later. He noticed the extra flour she had ordered. He noticed she was quieter at dinner, but he did not ask, which was very Wyatt, which was also, she realized, on the 21st day, a thing that could not last. He came into the kitchen at dawn. She had 6 loaves on the counter and 2 pies cooling on the sideboard. Cole was coming in an hour to run them to Cedar Falls before the sun got high. Wyatt stood in the doorway. He looked at the bread. He looked at the pies. He looked at her. That's a lot of bread for one crew. It's not for the crew. Then who is it for? The hotel in Cedar Falls, and the general store, and Casper Gibbs. Wyatt was very still. How long have you been selling bread in Cedar Falls? 3 weeks. Using my flour. I'm paying you back for the flour out of what I earn. There's a ledger on the shelf. You can look. He did not look. He kept looking at her. Why? Because I need money. I pay you money. You pay me $3 a week, and my mother's medicine costs $4. He did not answer. She kept going. Because now that she had started, she couldn't stop, and because I like it, and because I'm good at it, and because I can't sit here and cook for you and know that in less than 2 months you're going to lose this ranch, and I'm going to be back in Ridgewater with nothing but a recipe and a dead mother and a good year of memories. The kitchen was very quiet. Wyatt did not move. He did not blink. What did you say? Her hands were shaking. I said I can't sit here. After that, she swallowed. I heard you and Jonas Pike. He closed his eyes, just stood for a second, just long enough for her to see that she had cut him. You listened at my door. I stood in the hallway. You listened at my... Miss Merrick? Yes. He turned away from her. He walked to the window over the sink. He stood there with his back to her for a very long moment. His hand on the frame, head down. How much do you know? Cole told me, because I asked him, because I was going to figure it out anyway, because it's written all over you when Jonas Pike walks into a room. Wyatt turned. His face was terrible, not because it was angry, because it was open, because for the first time since she had ridden through his gate, Wyatt Kincaid was standing in his own kitchen with his defenses down, and she was watching him without any of them. Miss Merrick. Mr. Kincaid, I don't want your help. I didn't offer help. You will. Maybe. I don't want it. I know you don't. He stared at her. He looked like a man staring into a wind. You're 19 years old. I am. You have a dying mother and no money. And you rode 26 miles on a borrowed horse to ask for work. And you think you can help me? I don't think anything yet. I think I'm baking bread. I think I'm earning money. I think whatever happens next, I'm going to be a person who has money instead of a person who doesn't. And beyond that, I don't know. But don't stand there and tell me I can't try. He stared at her for a long time. Then he said, quietly, you gave me the day. Sir, you gave me the day. When I gave you the day. She did not know what he meant. Not exactly, but she felt it. She felt it the way you feel an approaching train through the ground before you hear it. He walked past her, out of the kitchen down the hall. She heard his study door close. She stood in the kitchen with 6 loaves and 2 pies and heard the clock tick and heard her own heart pound and heard very faintly the sound of a man in the room down the hall trying not to make a sound. The letter came on the 28th day. It was carried by a mail rider who had ridden through rain and looked like he'd been chewed on by every mile of it. Hollis opened it in the yard. She read it standing there, the wind pulling at the paper, the rider watering his horse behind her. The handwriting was Mrs. Headley's Dear Hollis. Your mother took a bad turn on Saturday. She fell in the kitchen and couldn't get up for some time. Mr. Headley found her when he went to deliver the flour you'd ordered. She is resting now, but she is weak. The doctor for Cedar Falls came again yesterday and says the lung trouble has gotten worse. I am sorry to write this, but I think you should come home as soon as you are able. Hollis stood in the yard. The wind kept moving. The horse kept drinking. The rider looked at her and asked, "Wab back?" And she said, "No, thank you." And Need gave him a nickel, because that was what you gave a mail rider, and he tipped his hat and rode out. And then she stood in the yard some more, because the world had just tilted. But mother was on the kitchen floor, and she was here baking bread for Sipor, and none of the small, careful things she had been building meant anything if she wasn't home. She walked into the house. She walked down the hall. She knocked once on Wyatt's study door. He opened it. He read her happened. My mother fell. She's worse. I need to go home. When not hesitate. When tomorrow. First light. That has to be enough. She's alone, Mr. Kincaid. She fell, and she was on the floor, and nobody found her until Mr. Hadley came with the flour. She was on the floor. Her voice cracked on the last word, just barely, just enough. Wyatt Kincaid did something she had never seen him do. He walked around his desks. That she could see the threads of silver in his gray hair, and the tiny scar on his left cheekbone, and the way his eyes, which she had once described to herself as cold, were not cold at all. They were the eyes of a man who had practiced keeping everything inside for so long that the effort had become invisible. Sit down, he said, gently. Not an order, a request. She sat. He poured her water. He handed it to her. She drank because her throat was dry, and accepting was easier than refusing. Tell me what you need. I need to go home. I know that. What else? I don't. I can't think right now. I just know I have to go. Then stop thinking and listen. He sat on the chips facing her. You'll take the bay gelding. He's faster than that borrowed mare, and he's sure-footed on bad roads. I'll send coal to Ridgewater tonight to get your mother's house ready, firewood. Water, supplies. Dr. Halloway will come again. I'll send word today. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. You've never asked me for anything, Hollis, not once. I'm the one who's telling you what's going to happen, because right now you're too scared to think straight, and someone needs to think straight. It was the first time he had called her Hollis. Not Miss Mary, Hollis. Her name in his mouth sounded different than she expected, heavier, more careful, as though he'd been carrying it around for a while and had only just decided to set it down. She looked at him. He looked back, and in the lamplight of his study, passed between them that neither of them named, because naming it would have made it real, and real was terrifying. My month is up, she said. Her voice was small. Your month was up 2 weeks ago. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to stay. I wanted you to stay. 3 words, simple as a fence post, heavy as the earth. Hollis pressed her hands together in her lap to keep them still. I don't know how long I'll be gone. Doesn't matter. It might be weeks. I know. It might be longer. I know. He stood, walked to the window, put his back to her. Your room will be here when you get back. Your job will be here if you need anything, money, supplies, a doctor, anything. You send word and I'll send it. Why are you doing this? He turned. Because you walked into my house a month ago and you cleaned kluch, and you made bread at midnight and you fixed my porch and you trimmed my lamps and you sat across from me and ate dinner and you asked me questions. Nobody has asked me in 8 years. And because before you came, this house was just a building where I slept, and now. He stopped. His jaw tightened. Now it's something else. The room was very still. I have to go, Hollis said. I know. I'll come back. You don't have to promise that. I'm not promising. I'm telling you. She stood. They were close, closer than they'd ever been. She reached out. She squeezed his hand, just long enough for the contact to register. His skin rough, his fingers strong, his grip tightening for a fraction of a second before he let go. Then she walked out. She did not sleep that night. She packed. She wrote instructions for Mose that were kinder than she would have written a month ago. She made a note for the crew. Don't let Mose overcook the beans. She organized the pantry one more time so that everyone could find things. At 4 a.m, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Cole appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for riding, his hat in his hand. I'm heading out now. I'll have the house ready before you get there. You don't have to ride through the night. Too late. I'm already awake and the coffee's already in me. Besides, your mother's house has a leaking roof, and I'd rather fix it before she has to ask. Hollis stared at him. How do you know about the roof? You mentioned it weeks ago, when you were talking to Mr. Kincaid about feeling guilty. You heard that. Cole shrugged. Sound carries in old houses. Don't worry, I wasn't listening on purpose. But once I heard it, I figured somebody ought to remember it. He put his hat on. "I'll see you in Ridgewater, Miss Merrick. Ride safe." He was gone. She stood in the kitchen she had made her own. Clean counters, organized shelves. The stove she had scrubbed and seasoned and nursed back into proper working order. The toilet where it kneaded dough every morning. The window where the bearded man, Rafe Bishop, had started leaving wildflowers in a tin can. She had not asked him to. He had just started doing it. Around the third week, she packed the last of the bread and one of the pies into a saddlebag. She wrote a note, left it on the counter, for the crew. "Don't let Mose overcook the beans." Then she went to the stable. The bay gelding was saddled and waiting. Someone had done it for her. She did not know who. Her borrowed mare from Mr. Hadley was unsaddled in the next stall, ready to be returned at leisure. Beside the gelding, hanging from a hook on the stall door, was a saddlebag she had not packed. She opened it. Inside was dried beef, hardtack, 2 apples, a canteen of water, and an envelope. She opened the envelope. There was money inside. More money than she had ever held at one time. Bills folded neatly. Enough to cover her mother's medicines and food and firewood for months. There was a folded document. She opened it with hands that had started to shake. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. Because it was a legal document, notarized, dated 3 weeks earlier, which meant he had done it not last night, but weeks ago. Around the time he first started sitting her down at his desk to eat dinner. It was a deed conveying 240 acres of broken spur land, the northeast section, along Blackwater River, good land, watered land, and that was hers if he signed it. He had signed it. The date was blank. There was a note pinned to the deed. "This is not charity. This is insurance. If the bank takes the ranch, this piece stands separate. Recorded in Cedar Falls, in your name." Wyatt did not know she knew about the debt when he did this, but she knew now, and she knew what it meant. He was preparing for the worst. He was preparing to lose everything, and he was making sure that when he lost it, she would still have something. "Take care of your mother." Hollis stood in the stable. She stood in the stable and read that note, and she felt something break inside her that she had not known was still whole. She did not cry. She had made a decision at age 14 not to cry, but she made an exception. She stood in the stable in the gray dawn light, and she cried. Not for long, not more than a minute. She wiped her face. She folded the deed. She tucked it into the seed catalog page next to Ruth's recipe, next to the letter about Ruth falling in the kitchen. 3 pieces of paper, 3 lives. She'd the gelding out. The ranch was quiet. The bunkhouse windows dark. The main house sat against the ridge the way it had the first time she saw it. Except now it did not look like a fortress. It looked like a house. A big, beautiful, sad house that had just started remembering how to be warm. She mounted. She turned in the saddle for one last look. Wyatt was standing on the porch. She had not heard him come out. He was in his shirt sleeves. No hat. His arms crossed over his chest. He was watching her, with an expression she could not read from this distance, but she felt it all the way across the yard. A look that was not goodbye. Something harder to name. Something that lived in the space between letting go and holding on. She raised her hand. He raised his. Then she stood digging toward the gate and rode out. The sun came up behind her as she rode. The prairie stretched out ahead, wide and golden and indifferent to the concerns of the people who crossed it. She did not look back. She found her mother thinner than she remembered. Ruth was in the narrow bed in the back room, propped up on pillows, hair loose, cheeks hollow, eyes too bright. The house looked different than Hollis had left it. The roof no longer leaked. Coal had done it. Firewood was stacked neatly outside. Water in the barrel. The stove worked properly. Someone had tightened a joint or replaced a gasket, and there was food in the pantry. Not just cornmeal and dried beans, but flour and butter and eggs and a jar of honey and dried apples and a sack of potatoes and a ham wrapped in cloth, which had all come from Wyatt. Because of course it had. Hollis sat on the edge of the bed and let her mother take her hands, and Ruth turned them over and studied the calluses on her palms. New calluses, different from the ones she'd had before. "You've been working hard. Have you, Mama? You look thin. You look worse." Ruth smiled, a thin, tired smile. "Come here." Hollis leaned in. Ruth touched her daughter's face with a hand that had less strength in it than it should have. Who is he? Hollis went still. Mama, I've been six. Not stupid. A man doesn't send a doctor and a pantry full of food, and God knows what else you're not telling me, for someone who just cooks and cleans. Hollis considered lying for about 3 seconds. His name is Wyatt Kincaid. He owns Broken Ranch. I work for him. You work for the richest man in the territory. He isn't as rich as they say. Hollis. Mama, I've been sick. Not stupid. Hollis looked down at her hands. The calluses. I don't know what he is, she said. I know he's lonely. I know his wife died 8 years ago, and he closed up a room in his house and set his dinner table for one, and forgot how to talk to people. I know he's not an easy man. I know he fired more workers than I can count, and he speaks in sentences that barely qualify as sentences, and he has never in his life said a soft thing when a hard thing would do. And he sent a doctor to you, and he gave me his best horse, and he stood on his porch in his shirt sleeves at dawn and watched me ride away, and he didn't say goodbye because I think he didn't know how. Ruth was quiet a long time. Outside, a bird was singing the same 3 notes over and over, the way birds do when they have something to say and no one to say it to. Your father was like that. Hollis looked up, couldn't say a tender thing to save his life. Used to show me he loved me by fixing things. I'd wake up in the morning and the fence would be mended, or the gate would be rehung, or there'd be firewood stacked by the door. Never said a word about it. Just did it, and went about his day like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. No, it wasn't nothing. Ruth's hand tightened on her daughter's. Be careful, Hollis. I am careful. No, you're brave. That's different. Brave gets you through the door. Careful keeps you from getting hurt on the other side. Hollis squeezed her mother's hand. Get some rest. You're always in the kitchen. That's where things get fixed. Ruth laughed. A small wheezy laugh that turned into a cough, that turned into a long, ragged breath that made Hollis's chest tighten. Then she closed her eyes and slept. And Hollis sat beside her and listened to her breathe, and counted each breath the way a miser counts coins. The days settled into a rhythm. She cooked, she cleaned, she tended Ruth, and she baked, because word had come with her from Cedar Falls. Casper Gibbs at the saloon had told the freight rider who came into Ridgewater, who had told the hotel owner, who had come to Hollis's door the day after she got home. He said, I hear you bake, he said. I hear you bake bread that men would kill their brothers for, he said. Would you consider selling to my hotel here in Ridgewater as well? She said yes. By the end of the first week, she had orders from the Ridgewater Hotel and the general store and Mrs. Patterson down the road who had a birthday coming. By the end of the second week, she was baking so much she had to build an outdoor brick oven in the yard to keep up rough. Made from scraps, but it worked. She was making money, real money. She sent some to her mother's medicine. She sent the rest to the tin under the bed. She did not write to Wyatt. She tried twice, sat down with pen and paper, and got as far as Dear Mr. Kincaid, and then stopped. She baked instead. She was in the yard on a Thursday afternoon, sliding a peel into the brick oven. When she saw the horse coming up the road, she did not recognize the horse, but she recognized the rider, because he was tall and well-dressed, and wearing a black coat that had been brushed clean. His hat in his hand as he came into her yard, hair gray at the temples, eyes pale blue, Jonas Pike. He rode up to her fence. He stopped. He looked around the yard, the small house, the outdoor oven, the clothesline with her one good dress, the chickens scratching in the dirt. He smiled, which was worse than if he had scowled. Miss Merrick, Mr. Pike, may I come in? No, he laughed, like she had told a small joke. You are direct. I like that. I don't much care what you like, Mr. Pike. Then I'll be direct as well. He swung from his horse. He tied it at her fence like it was his fence. I have come a long way to talk to you, Miss Merrick. I have concluded that you deserve to know some things Wyatt Kincaid has not told you. Mr. Pike, hear me out, please. She did not answer, which he took as permission. Wyatt Kincaid is going to lose his ranch. Nothing you do will change that. Nothing he does will change that. The paper is signed, the math is done, it's over. Then, why are you here? Because I like you. She almost laughed. She did not. Miss Merrick, I have been watching for a long time. I know who works for Kincaid. I know how long. I know what wages he pays, and I know that when the ranch goes, every one of those men will scatter, and you. You will be back here in this house with a dying mother and an outdoor brick oven and no future. He reached into his coat. He took out an envelope. He held it out. She did not take it. What is that? $500. She did not move. That is a year of your mother's medicine. That is a proper roof on this house. That is a proper oven in a proper bakery, in a proper storefront on the main street of Ridgewater. That is a life, Miss Merrick. In exchange for, you leave broken spur. You do not return. You do not write to him. You do not send word. You go quiet. That is all. Right, because he loves you. The words hung in the yard between the chickens and the clothesline and the brick oven, between a woman with flour on her hands and a man in a black coat. Hollis's throat closed. He does not love me, Miss Merrick. He hardly speaks to me, Miss Merrick. I have known Wyatt Kincaid since we were both boys. I know how that man loves. It is not with poetry. It is not with flowers. It is not with speeches and silence and deeds and doctors giving a woman his best horse. You don't know. I know he gave you land. Hollis went still. I know because I looked. I know because he had it recorded in Cedar Falls, in your name. 240 acres signed, waiting for a date. That was 3 weeks after you arrived, Miss Merrick. 3 weeks. Her mouth was very dry. That doesn't mean. It means everything. He is 52 years old. He has not loved a woman since Cordelia. And now here you are, and there he is, and in a matter of weeks he will lose his ranch, and he will lose everything, and he will still have this poisonous idea in his head that if he can keep you safe, if he can keep one thing safe, then it will have been worth it. Jonas Pike lowered his voice. I am giving you a chance to save him from that. Take the money. Save your mother. Do not go back. He extended the envelope again. Or what? Or you go back to him and he loses the ranch and you lose your name. Because I will make sure the story of the 19-year-old girl who slept in his house for a month becomes the loudest story in the territory. The wind moved. The clothesline moved. Hollis did not move. She looked at Jonas Pike. She looked at the man who had loved a woman when he was 12 and had never grown up. She said, very quietly, I'd like you to leave. Miss Merrick, I'd like you to leave. He held out the envelope one more time. He set the envelope on the fence post. He walked to his horse. He mounted. He tipped his hat. He rode out. Hollis stood in the yard until his dust was gone. Then she picked up the envelope. She walked into the house. She walked to the stove. She did not open it. She did not count it. She just put it on top of the seed catalog page and Ruth's recipe and the deed. 4 pieces of paper. Because Ruth called from the back room. Just a small voice. Just her name. She left the papers on the table. She went to her mother. Ruth was awake. Alert. More alert than she had been in days. Which was not good. Hollis had lived with this illness long enough to know what a bright morning meant. She sat on the edge of the bed. Ruth's hand found hers. Who was that in the yard? Nobody, Mama. That was not nobody. A man from Cedar Falls. About Wyatt. About Wyatt. Ruth was quiet. She was looking at the window. Hollis, yes, Mama. Where do you want to go? I want to stay right here with you. Where do you want to go? Hollis did not answer. Her mother's hand tightened, weak but tight. Girl, I am tired. I am so tired. I have been tired since your father died. And I have been more tired since I got sick. And I have been holding on because I did not want you to be alone. But you are not alone anymore. Mama, you listen, because I am only going to thesis once. Hollis listened. You do not stay here for me. You do not stay here at all. You do not turn down a life because you are afraid of losing me, because you will lose me, and when you do. I want to know you did not stay small on my account. Mama, do you love him? Hollis opened her mouth, closed it, opened it. I don't know how to know that yet, Mama. I'm 19. He's 52. He owns half a territory, or he did, or he will, and I have flour under my fingernails, and I don't know what any of that adds up to. Oh, do you love him? Hollis's eyes filled. Yes. Ruth, a slow, long exhale, like a woman setting down a bucket she had been carrying uphill for years. Then go. Mama, he's going to lose the ranch. There's a man out there. He's offering me money to leave. He said he'll ruin me if I go back. Then go. Huts Merrick. I did not raise a daughter to stand in a yard and be bought. Hollis stared at her mother. Ruth's eyes were bright. Ride tomorrow, girl. Not next week. Tomorrow. Mama, I can't leave you. Mrs. Hadley comes Tuesdays. Dr. Halloway comes Fridays, and and I have been dying for 6 months, and I am not going to be rushed. Ride tomorrow. I will be here when you get back, or I will not. Either way, you will be a woman who did the brave thing, not the careful thing. Mama. Ruth's hand tightened. Promise me, Mama. Promises test press. For pressed her forehead against her mother's hand. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, so quietly it was almost not a word, I promise. She sat with her mother until dark. She fed her broth. She read to her from a book of Psalms. At full dark, she went to the kitchen. The envelope was still on the table. She picked it up. She walked outside. She walked to the outdoor oven. The coals were still hot. She opened the door and she fed the envelope, unopened, into the coals. The paper caught. The money caught. $500 turned to ash inside of 30 seconds. She stood there and watched it go. She thought, I do not sell him. Not for $500. Not for $5,000. Not for 100 years of medicine and a proper storefront and a life I could build without him. Because whatever else I do not know, I know that. She went inside. She did not sleep. She packed at 3 in the morning, 2 shirts, the seed catalog page, the Ruth recipe, her mother's small comb because her mother had told her once when she was 9 that the comb had belonged to her grandmother. At 4, she made breakfast, set it beside the bed, told her mother she would be back before the moon changed, kissed her forehead. Ruth said, ride hard. Hollis said, I will. Ruth said, tell him. Hollis said, tell him what? Ruth said, he will know what. And then she smiled. The last smile Hollis would ever see on her mother's face. She mounted the bay gelding at 4:30. She turned east. The stars were still out. The road was empty. She was not $500. She was not paper on a fence post. She was Hollis Merrick, and she was coming. She rode into Broken Spur at midday. The gelding was lathered. Her hands were raw from the reins. Her lower back had stopped being a back somewhere around the 2nd hour and had become a single long ache from her neck to her heels. She did not care. She rode straight through the gate, straight across the yard, past Cole, who was coming out of the stables with a bridle in his hand and who took one look at her face and dropped the bridle and started walking toward her fast. Miss Merrick, he needs to see me. He's in his study. Good. Miss Merrick. Slow down. What happened? She dismounted wrong. Her legs did not work the way she thought they would. She half slid, half fell, and Cole caught her elbow before she hit the ground. Whoa! Sit! Sit! Anyway, he walked her to the porch, sat her on the step, went and got her a dipper of water from the well, made her drink it, watched her drink it. She drank. Cole. Yes, ma'am. Jonas Pike came to my house yesterday. Cole went very still. What did he want? He wanted to buy me $500 to not come back. Cole closed his eyes just for a second. And you're here. I'm here. Does Wyatt know? Not yet. Cole exhaled, long, slow, like a man who had been holding his breath. Miss Merrick, there is something else you need to know. She looked up at him. He's going to sell the herd. What? Cattle buyer out of Kansas. Wyatt sent word 2 weeks ago. Buyer's coming next Tuesday. Wyatt is going to sell 2,000 head at a bad price in the wrong season because it's the only way he can put together the money in time. Hollis stood up too fast. Her legs don't give out again. She grabbed the porch rail. He can't do that. He is doing it. He's giving up the future to save the present. He's saving something. He's saving nothing. 2,000 head at Kansas prices in April will get you enough to pay Pike, enough interest to buy another 60 days. And then he'll be right back in the same hole with half a ranch. He knows that. He has to know that. Cole looked at her. He's not thinking clearly, Miss Merrick. He's thinking about losing. He's thinking about losing. Then somebody has to think about winning. She went into the house. She walked down the hall. She did not knock on his study door. She opened it. Wyatt Kincaid was at his desk, papers spread across it. A ledger open, a whiskey glass at his elbow that was empty and had been empty for a while. Judging by the ring on the wood, he looked up. Whatever he had been about to say died in his throat because he had not expected to see her, because she looked like a woman who had ridden through the night. And then some. You're back. I'm back. She's the mother, still alive. She sits down his pen. Sit down, Hollis. No, you look like. No. I said no. He did not sit either. They stood on opposite sides of that desk. The way they had stood on opposite sides of a lot of things for a month. Except now she had crossed something, and he could feel it, and he did not know what. Jonas Pike came to see me. The color did not leave Wyatt's face this time. It went the other way. He went red under the gray of his skin. When? Afternoon. At my mother's house. What did he want? He offered me $500 to leave you, to not come back, to go quiet. Wyatt's hands went to the edge of his desk. He gripped it. Hard. Where is he? Ridgewater. Until tomorrow. Oh, you won't. Sit down, Wyatt. She had never called him Wyatt. He heard it. She heard it. Not because she told to, because his knees needed him to. She stayed standing. I burned the money. I burned it. In the oven last night. Before I rode. So do not stand here and tell me that I am going to be paid off, or that I am going to be ruined, or that I am going to be anything except exactly what I am, which is your problem, because I am not leaving. I do not care what he says about my reputation. I do not care what he says about anything. He can burn the whole valley, and I will still be standing on your porch. Wyatt did not speak. He was looking at her the way a man looks at weather he has never seen before. Cole told me you're selling 2,000 head next Tuesday. His jaw tightened. That's business, Hollis. That's suicide. 2,000 head at Kansas prices in April will get you enough to pay Pike enough interest to buy another 60 days. And then you will be sitting on half a herd, trying to service the same debt with less cash flow and a herd too small to recover from the next bad winter. It's not business, Wyatt. It's grief. He looked at her, not angry, almost wondering. How do you know that? Because I've been keeping accounts too. On what? On you? On Pike? On what he owns and what he leans on? On what your neighbors owe him and on what your neighbors owe each other? On the price of feed and the price of beef and the timing of the railroad. For 3 weeks I've been baking bread in Cedar Falls, Wyatt. And you know who buys bread? Every merchant in town. And you know what people do when they eat someone's bread every day. They talk. And I listen. Hollis, listen to me. I am listening. There is another way. She reached into her coat. She took out a small notebook, worn, bent, full. She set it on his desk. She opened it. 12 families in this valley owe money to Cedar Falls Bank. Not all of them owe as much as you, but all of them owe, and every single one of them hates Jonas Pike. Because he has done to them a smaller version of what he has done to you. Because he has bought up their notes when they were vulnerable. Because he has moved the terms. Because he has waited until the crop failed, or the child got sick, or the winter hit, and then he has come to collect. Wyatt was staring at the notebook. You wrote all of this down. I wrote all of it down. And I did more than that. She turned the page. As I wrote to a lawyer in St. Louis. His name is Ambrose Halloway. He is Dr. Wren Halloway's brother. She told me about him. He handles land and finance disputes. He has argued 3 cases in front of the territorial court in Cedar Falls in the last 2 years. He has never lost one. Hollis. I wrote to him 2 weeks ago. I told him what Pike has been doing. He wrote back. He wrote back 6 days ago. He said if we can try to file a joint complaint, alleges usurious practices and coordinated foreclosure. Under the territorial lending statutes, he will take the case, on contingency, meaning we pay him nothing unless we win. Wyatt sat back in his chair. He looked like a man who had been hit in the chest with something soft but heavy. You wrote to a lawyer. I wrote to a lawyer. 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, without telling me, without telling you. Because. You would have said no. He almost smiled. Most. You are right. I would have said no. I know. That's why I did it. He looked at her long. Hollis Merrick, Wyatt Kincaid. Sit down. This time she sat. Because now we're building something and you build sitting down. He read the notebooks slowly all the way through. He turned the pages. He stopped on some. He read them twice. She watched. His face. Do things she had never seen it do. Anger. And under the anger something older. Something almost like relief. Because for 8 years Wyatt Kincaid had been carrying this alone. For 8 years he had lived inside a story where Jonas Pike was untouchable. And the only response was to work harder and pay when he could, and pretend that Cordelia's death was weather. And here was a 19-year-old girl, with flour under her nails, handing him a notebook. He closed it. He set it down. You need 5 ranchers. I have 8. You have 8. I have 8. I did not go to them myself. Cole did, and Rafe Bishop did, and Casper Gibbs at the saloon did, 'cause Casper hates Pike more than any man in the county, and Casper knows everyone. And once he understood what we were doing, he rode to 5 ranches in 2 days and came back with signatures. Casper Gibbs. Casper Gibbs. Wyatt shook his head, slow, wondering. You built a coalition, Hollis, in 3 weeks. I built a piece of 1. You are going to build the rest. How? You're going to write a letter tonight to Ambrose Holloway, confirming Broken Spur is joining the complaint. Cole will write it to the stage tomorrow, and on Tuesday, when the cattle buyer arrives, you are going to send him home. Hollis, if I don't sell the herd, I have very little time left. You have very little time if you wait. You have longer if you file. Because the moment Holloway files, the court will freeze the terms of every loan Pike holds, pending investigation. That is how the statute reads. Pike cannot foreclose on you while the case is pending, and the case will take at least 6 months to resolve, by which time you will have the fall dry, by which time we can pay him fair value at fair terms, if we lose, and if we win. She looked at him. If we win, Pike is done in this territory. He is barred from lending, and every ranch he holds paper on. Everyone gets to renegotiate at market rates. Wyatt did not move for a long time. Then he stood up. He walked around the desk. He stopped in front of her chair. He looked down at her. You did this for me. For you. Because. Neither of them said it. Because it was too much, and because it was the wrong day. Wyatt Kincaid put his hand on the top of her head. Just once, just briefly. The way a man might touch something precious that he was afraid to hold with both hands. Then he went back to his desk. He picked up his pen. He said, "Write to Mr. Holloway." The letter went out on Friday. Cole wrote it to the Cedar Falls stage himself. He did not stop at the bank. He did not stop at the hotel. He rode straight to the stage office. Handed the letter to the driver. Watched the driver put it in the mailbag. Watched the coach roll east. Then he rode home. The cattle buyer came Tuesday. His name was Fletcher. He was a plain man from Wichita in a plain hat. He had brought his own weighing chains. He shook Wyatt's hand. He said, "Ready to look at those cattle?" Wyatt said, "There aren't going to be any cattle today, Mr. Fletcher." Fletcher blinked. "I beg pardon. Situation's changed. I appreciate you making the ride. There's food in the cookhouse. My cook will feed you before you turn back, and I'll pay for your time. But there's no sale." Fletcher looked at Wyatt. He looked at Cole standing behind Wyatt. He looked at Hollis on the porch. He made a small sound, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Mr. Kincaid, I've been in this business 22 years. That's the first time a rancher has ever waved me off after I made the ride. I apologize for the inconvenience." Fletcher tipped his hat. "You keep your cattle, Mr. Kincaid. Something tells me you know what you're doing." He rode out. The next day, Mr. Ambrose Holloway's telegram arrived at Cedar Falls. Filed to stop injunction requested. Stop served by end of week. Stop Holloway. Wyatt sat with the telegram in the kitchen. He read it 3 times. He set it down. He looked at Hollis, who was pulling bread out of the oven, whose face was flushed with the heat, and whose hair was coming loose from the pins she had tried to put in that morning. "It's done. It started. That's a different thing. It's a different thing." He looked at the telegram again. "Cordelia would have liked you." Hollis went still. She set the bread on the counter. She did not turn around because she was afraid if she turned around he would see her face. She said it again, quieter. "She would have liked you, Hollis." She would have said that, girl. That's a whole person. And she would have said it just like that. Hollis turned. Her eyes were wet. His were too. They did not touch. They stood in the kitchen, a loaf of bread between them, a telegram on the table, and they looked at each other for a long time. Then he cleared his throat. He picked up the telegram. He walked out, because they were not there yet. But they were closer. Jonas Pike was served on Friday. He was in his office after hours. He had a whiskey. He was reading a letter from his mother in Kansas. The territorial marshal knocked, handed him a folded document. Said, "Mr. Pike, consider yourself served." Then walked out. Jonas Pike read the document. He read it twice. He read it a 3rd time, because on the 3rd reading his hands were shaking too badly for the first 2 to have counted. Complainants. Wyatt Kincaid, Broken Spur Ranch, and set the pepper down. He stared out his window at the little town of Cedar Falls, where he had built his bank and his reputation and his slow, patient revenge over 3 decades, where a 19-year-old girl with flour on her hands had just cut the drought from under him in the space of a month. He picked up his whiskey. He set it down without drinking, because there was no drinking his way out of this one. The hearing was set for October, 6 months out, which meant no foreclosure, which meant no forced sale, which meant Broken Spur could work through the summer, move the herd, bring the fall drive to market, pay Pike what was owed under whatever new terms the court eventually set. Wyatt understood this. Slowly over the course of a week, he understood she had not saved him. She had built a way for him to save himself, which was different, which was harder, which was love. He walked out to the yard on a Sunday morning. Hollis was at the outdoor oven she had built along the barn wall. She had convinced Rafe Bishop to help her lay the bricks. She had started supplying the Cedar Falls bakery orders and the Ridgewater bakery orders from the sheaths now, because it was easier, and because the ranch had flour to spare, and because she had made a deal with Wyatt that she would pay for what she used. And he had laughed, actually laughed, and said fine if she insisted. He walked up to the oven. She was pulling out pies. He watched her for a moment, then he said, "Halas, she looks, yes. I owe you a pie." She raised an eyebrow. "You owe me a pie. I want to bake you a pie, in your kitchen, under your supervision, right now." Wyatt Kincaid, Hollis Merrick. She stared at him. She wiped her hands on her apron. She said, "Come on." He was terrible. He was worse than Cole. He was possibly worse than Mose. He measured flour with the confidence of a man who had never measured anything smaller than a herd. He handled dough like I had personally insulted him. He rolled so thick you could have shingled a roof with it. She stood next to him with her arms crossed. She said nothing, because it was more fun watching him fail. He looked over at her once. "You are enjoying this. I am enjoying this. You could help. I could. But you're not going to. I'm not going to." He grunted, went back to his crust. The pie came out at 4 in the afternoon. It was ugly. The crust was uneven, lumpy on one side, thin on the other. There was a small burn mark on the left where he had let the edge sit too close to the heat. The apples had leaked out one corner in a rusty little stain. He set it on the counter. He looked at it. "That is the worst pie I have ever seen," he said. "That is the worst pie anyone has ever seen. I followed your recipe exactly." "You did not. I followed it inexactly. You definitely followed it inexactly." He picked up a knife. He cut a slice. He put it on a plate. He handed it to her. "Eat." She took the plate. She looked at him. She looked at the pie. She took a bite. It was bad. It was genuinely bad. The crust was tough, and the apples were undercooked in one place and burned in another, and there was too much cinnamon and not enough sugar. She chewed. She swallowed. She looked at Wyatt Kincaid, who was watching her, the tarse on his sleeve for the first time in 8 years. "This pie is terrible," he said. "I know." He said, "Hollis." They did not touch. They did not kiss. They stood in a kitchen that used to be nobody's and was now theirs, and they looked at each other over a bad pie, and neither of them said a word for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "When your mother is well enough to travel, or when she is not, whichever comes first, I want to marry you, Hollis Merrick." She did not answer right away because her throat had closed, because her hands were shaking. She swallowed. She said, yes, just the one word. That was all he needed. The letter came 6 days later. Mrs. Hadley wrote it. Ruth passed on Wednesday morning, peaceful in her sleep. She had eaten her breakfast the day before. She had asked me to tell you Tusher she was proud. She said, "Tell Hollis, the bread was always going to rise. Come home when you can. There is no rush now." Hollis read it standing in the yard. She did twice. She folded, she put it in her apron pocket. She walked to the barn. She saddled the bay gelding. Cole appeared beside her. He said, "I'll come with you." She said, "No." He said, "Yes." She said, "Cole." He said, "Hollis." She stopped saddling. She looked at him. She said, "All right." Wyatt met them at the gate on his own horse. He had a bag on his saddle. He had already packed. He did not say anything. He just fell in beside her. The three of them rode to Ridgewater together. Tethys was small. That's all. Mrs. Hadley had Casper, Gibbs, 2 neighbors, Cole, Wyatt, Hollis, and a preacher who had known Ruth for 22 years and did not need notes because he had a whole life to draw from. They buried her beside Hollis's father under a cottonwood at the edge of the small cemetery outside town. Hollis did not cry at the graveside. She had made her decision about crying when she was 14. She stood between Wyatt and Cole, and she looked at the fresh dirt, and she thought, I promised her I would be brave. Not careful, and I have been brave. She turned to Wyatt. I am ready to go home, he said. Home to Broken Spur, she said. Home. The trial came and went that October. Ambrose Holloway argued the case with a precision that made 3 of the 7 other ranchers weep in the courtroom. He introduced Hollis's notebook as evidence. He introduced letters, and on the last day, he introduced a letter had found in the closed parlor 2 weeks after Hollis had left for Ridgewater the first time, because Wyatt had opened that parlor. He had not touched anything in it for 8 years. But he had opened it, and he had gone through it, and in a drawer of Cordelia's writing desk, he had found a letter she had written and never sent. The letter was to Jonas Pike. It said, Jonas, I have heard what you said to Wyatt about the credit. I am writing this in case something happens to me. I want you to know that if you refuse him this loan and I do not survive, you will have made yourself a murderer in the eyes of God, even if the law never touches you, and you will have done it because you have loved me since we were 12 years old, and you have never grown out of that. You will not have him. This letter will find its way somewhere, even after I am gone, Cordelia. Ambrose Holloway read the letter in open court. He read it slowly. He read it clearly. He read it while Jonas Pike sat at the defense table and did not move a muscle. The judge ruled from the bench. Pike was ordered to cease all lending in the territory. Every note he held was subject to renegotiation at market rates. And Cedar Falls Bank, which had operated under his sole ownership, was ordered wound up and its holdings transferred to a receiver. Jonas Pike left Cedar Falls before the first snow. He did not fight it. He did not appeal. He rode out one Thursday afternoon in November, with 1 horse and 1 bag, and he was not seen again. Some said he went back to Kansas. Some said he went further. Wyatt did not care where he went. Wyatt cared that the ranch was safe, and that in the spring of 1884, he was going to marry Hollis Merrick. The wedding was small, not because they could not afford larger, because they did not want larger. It was held in the yard behind the outdoor oven Hollis had built along the barn wall, because that was where she had built her first thing, and because the oven was still standing, and because she said it was the only place that felt right. Cole stood up with Wyatt. Mrs. Hadley came down from Ridgewater. Casper Gibbs came in from Cedar Falls. Rafe Bishop and Wesley Vance and Mose Kettering and 40 other men from Broken Spur stood in a rough half-circle behind them. Mose brought a pie. He handed it to her without meeting her eyes. He said, "Ma'am." He walked away. The pie was, by objective assessment, not terrible. She set it on the table next to the wedding cake. Ambrose Holloway came from St. Louis. He brought his sister, Dr. Wren Holloway, who had by then been to Ruth's grave twice with fresh flowers because she had liked Ruth and had wanted to say so properly. Wren stood on Hollis's side, which was the smaller side, which was the side that would have been her mother's. Hollis wore her mother's dress. Not the patched one, the other one. The one Ruth had kept in a chest in the back room for 23 years, made from good calico blue, with small white flowers along the hem. Ruth had worn it to marry Hollis's father. Now Hollis wore it. She stood in front of the preacher under the open sky, in the yard behind the barn, and Wyatt Kincaid stood across from her, in a clean shirt and boots that had been polished that morning. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said quietly, so only she could hear, "Hollis Merrick," she said, "Wyatt Kincaid." The preacher started, and 30 years passed the way years pass on a working ranch, in seasons, in keeps. He's in fall rounds up since to Caven. Claims Stranger he's in one long, slow fuss that neither of them had to talk about, because it was in the small things now, the hand on the small of a back passing through a doorway. The coffee poured a certain way. The chair pulled out at the table. Hollis opened the bakery in Ridgewater the summer after her mother died. because she had promised Ruth she would build something, and because a bakery was the thing she knew how to build, and because Wyatt had said, build it. Whatever you want, wherever want, and I will haul the flour. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, both grown by 1913, both with children of their own, and on a porch behind the small bakery on Main Street of Ridgewater. In September of 1913, Wyatt Kincaid is 82 years old, Hollis is 49. Their grandson Tobias is 10, named for Cordelia's father, whose name was Tobias Merritt, because Wyatt asked. And Hollis said yes, because by then Cordelia had been part of both of them for a very long time. Tobias is sitting on the porch steps. Wyatt is in the rocking chair. Hollis is inside. She is teaching Tobias's mother, their daughter-in-law Winifred, how to bake sourdough from a recipe on a seed catalog page that is now 65 years old. Held together with paste and hope, Tobias has been listening to his grandfather talk for an hour. He looks up. He says, "Grandpa, what was the most important thing?" Wyatt looks at him. Now Wyatt Kincaid, 52 once this story started, now 82, iron gray hair gone all white, eyes still pale, except softer, because they have had 30 years of softening. He does not answer right away. He looks through the doorway. He can see Hollis, bent over the counter. Her hair silver. Now her hands still moving the way. Hands move when they know their work. She is laughing at something Winifred said. Wyatt looks back at Tobias. He says, "The most important thing is not what you build." Tobias waits. Says, "It is not what you own. It is not how much land. It is not how many cattle. It is not the ranch. It is not the bank. It is not any of that." Tobias says, "What is it?" Wyatt says, "It is who is willing to jump in with you when you are drowning." Tobias frowns. "Jump in? Jump in, not pull you out. Pull you out is easy. Anyone with a rope can pull you out. Jump in is different. Jump in means they get wet with you. Jump in means they might drown too, and they do it anyway, because they have looked at your face and they have decided that whatever happens next, they are not doing it without you." Passes is quiet. Then he says, "Grandma jumped in." Fatit smiles, the full smile, not the fractional one from the study desk in 1883, the whole one. Grandma jumped in, inside the bakery. Hollis looks up, feels his eyes on her, meets them through the open door. She smiles, just for him, the way she has smiled at him for 30 years of keys across every kitchen they have shared. Wyatt raises one hand. She raises hers. Tobias looks at his grandfather, Ephra. He says, "Was it hard, Grandpa, being the one who was drowning?" Wyatt looks at the boy. He thinks about the answer. He thinks about a night, the study, when a 19-year-old girl walked in without knocking and set a notebook on his desk. He thinks about the burned envelope she never told him about until years later, when Cole told him at a fire outside the bunkhouse with too much whiskey keyed in both of them. He thinks about the day the judge read Cordelia's letter aloud. He thinks about a bad pie in his own kitchen and a woman saying, "This is the best pie I have ever eaten." He says, "It was hard being the one drowning, son. Because I did not know I was drowning. I thought I was working. I thought I was building. I thought I was doing what a man does. And your grandmother walked through my gate with a borrowed horse. And she looked at me one time and she saw what I could not see, which was that I was going under." Tobias nods, solemn. Wyatt Kincaid reaches out. He puts his big weathered hand on the boy's shoulder. He says, "Remember this, because I will not always be here to say it. When someone jumps in with you, you spend the rest of your life earning it. You do not ever stop earning it. Not one day." Tobias says, "Yes, Grandpa." Wyatt says, "Good boy." Inside the brie. Hollis is pulling loaf out of the oven, golden brown, cracked across the top, like the earth cracking open after rain. The bell over the door chimes. A customer. The day goes on. The bread keeps rising. And somewhere between the porch and the counter, between the boy and the man, between the woman at the oven and the woman she used to be, the whole story sits. Not on paper, not on a deed, not in a bank vault or a courthouse or a ledger, but in the ordinary miracle of 2 people who kept getting up and kept doing the work, and kept jumping in every single day, for 30 years, and counting,